very good evening to all our viewers and welcome to another edition of Evening Review. My name is Philip Joseph and I will be your host for tonight's edition. Joining us this evening is the Namibia Bus and Taxi Association Secretary General, that is Mr. Pendapala Nakathingo, as we will be touching on what has recently occurred with the increase of taxi fares, which has gone from 13 Namibian dollars up until 15 Namibian dollars, which took effect on the 18th of May 2026, this week on Monday, where we'll touch on how the association, as well as taxi drivers and commuters, have taken this increase. Mr. Nakathingo, thank you for making the time this evening.
Yes, good evening.
Yes, just to get straight into things, as of Monday, the taxi fare has increased. Obviously, there has been a division amongst now the commuters and obviously the taxi drivers. But from the union's perspective, if we have to look at how this decision came about, maybe take us through the process as to who decides, who makes the final decision, and so forth.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much. When it comes to the fare increment within the bus and taxi industry, yeah, of course, there are now processes where this increment have to be determined. So first and foremost, the taxi started way long back, and in this regard to where we are now, the industry, the association have now to determine, in accordance the situation that as of now the fuel has been increasing, commodities and so forth. Yeah, so now the association has to determine how much supposed to be increased, and we inform the government. We have to write to the Road Transportation Board. So then the board have now to look at the proposed taxi fare increment, and then now have to approve accordingly.
Okay, I mean, as of recent, even before the decision went into effect, there have been some videos, for instance, the one that was trending not so long ago in Rundu, where some of the taxi drivers felt that the increase from 13 to 15 is rather still low, given the fact that petrol prices now are above $20. As a union, do you still feel that maybe taxi drivers are still underpaid in that?
Yeah, of course, the situation is very hostile, and it's really painful and it's biting, especially now when it comes to the survival of bus and taxi operators. But looking at the current situation also, it's not just necessarily to say we have to satisfy the bus and taxi operator, but as this increment comes about, it came at a real necessary time, whereby it has been for a long time the bus and taxi fare had never been increased since 2021, and considering how many times fuel has been increased, how many times the commodity has been increased, but since NAPTA, it's a responsible association that considering all facts and looking at the commuter situation as well. So therefore, the 15% that was approved, of course, is not sufficient, but at least it is something that one can work on. Adding to that, we also took note and acknowledged with appreciation the decision that is being taken by the government, especially from our line ministry. You took note, or you realize or recognize the Deputy Director of Transport Regulation, Mr. Mabengano, who was recently just give that announcement regarding the unlawful or illegal transportations, and also now recently the law enforcement, where they announced to say, of course, whoever transporting illegally is going to be dealt with. That was one of our call to the authorities to say, with this increment, it is not really enough. But if our government, through the law enforcement or agencies, can take drastic measures to protect the taxi industry by protecting those who are now operating fair and lawfully, it will be something tangible, and I think it will be something to protect the industry and to safeguard the the business of bus and taxi operators. Okay. We really appreciate on that.
Yes, I mean, if we have to look down, if we have to go down memory lane, if we look at the last 15 years or even more in terms of the increment of taxi fares, there's always been a constant battle in terms of that increment, and where you always tend to find a lot of resentment and resistance from the commuters themselves. But can you maybe just take us through as to why at times these decisions also take long in cases like this? Like for instance, with the now recent $13 to $15 increase.
Yeah, of course, the increment. The commuters not necessarily become so resistant when it comes to the increment. But of course, one can feel the pain from the passenger side. Yeah. That, of course, when bus and taxi fare increased, it's only when you hear the commuters talking about the increment or the high rates of taxi fare. Yeah. But when it comes to commodity increments such as food, bread, beers, whatsoever you can name it, you don't hear anybody talking. Yeah. But when it comes to public transport, of course you will hear number of commuters and the public, give their sentiments, feelings and so forth. Mm-hmm. So what I'm trying to say is that, of course, one can understand, because whenever you go to work, majorities, 65% of the entire population rely on taxi services. And therefore now, when the taxi fare increased, it's when everybody feel it. When you want to go to church, to work, to shopping, you have to use public transport. Mm-hmm. But if we can be fair enough, I think the commuters' complaints or resistance comes as the reason to say the taxi is to increase, their salaries never increased. So, but that's why I'm saying that could not be the reason. Mm-hmm. But if the association has to increase every time whenever the fuel price increased or whenever the commodity increased, it will be very difficult for the commuters, and citizens are going to suffer. So therefore, one last part we have been, and we are calling upon or requesting from our authorities, particularly from our government, it is to consider the subsidy. So, of course, the government, I think there is a wrong perception within the government corridors or within the government perspective to say the public transport is being funded or subsidized. No. That's not. Only city of Windhoek or Windhoek municipalities, buses that used to be subsidized or that is being subsidized, not the entire public transport. All buses and taxis you see transporting passengers across the country are vehicles that bought by individuals, run by individuals. All expenses, all costs are just at the shoulders of bus and taxi operators. So therefore, our request still, additional to what we appreciated just recently, of calling upon all those who are transporting illegally to desist or to cease their operation, illegal operations. We appreciate that, but subsidizing the public transport sector or the taxi industry will be a solution to protect the commuters and also to support the bus and taxi operators. That is one really what the government really need to consider as a matter of agency.
Okay. And interesting fact that you've mentioned the taxi industry wanting to be subsidized, but also just to explain to our viewers at home, when we speak of subsidy, what are we looking at? Are we looking at you guys wanting the government to come in or to subsidize the industry through capital, or are we looking at the product itself where the government says, look, we've bought this amount of taxis and buses for you guys, this is what's going to happen?
Yeah, of course, it will depend to what the government can afford at the time. or where they are able to. But what we are saying is, in terms of the subsidy, one simple reason or example is to say, of course, the taxi fare is like currently is $15.
Yes.
Now the government have now to fork in half of that, and the passenger pay half. So that is one of the subsidy that we are now considering, to say, if the government can look at that, of course it can be done. It's the same as, you know, you can see the fuel price was to be so very high like now, but the government took some efforts to bail out the retailers, those who are in the fuel industry, so that they cannot charge much from the public.
Okay.
So that is the same exactly that we are now referring to, so that the government can come to the rescue, not only for bus and taxi operators, but for the public. Because whenever the government subsidy being considered within the taxi industry, who is going to appreciate more are the passengers. The commuters are going to appreciate more, because the taxi drivers or the bus operators, they are now going to charge according to what it is being determined in terms of the subsidy.
Okay, and I mean, you spoke of the government coming through halfway, and then passengers also coming through, or the commuters coming through halfway. So are we looking at the government, for instance, covering $8 of the taxi fare, and then commuters giving?
So of course, when you look at $15, you can divide. You say that the commuters pay $8, then the government pay $7, or whatever the case might be. If the government cannot go halfway, they can come in up to where they can, subsidize. Because we can, what we are saying is just to see how best the government can support the taxi industry. When you support the taxi industry, you do not just support the taxi and bus operators, you support the public, because who feel the pain currently now are the, both operators and the passengers, yes. But more the commuters. They are now. That's why you see it took us sometimes long not to increase, because you look at the situation and the circumstances. But at the end of the day, we did not do justice to the taxi industry, because at the end of the day, the law enforcement agencies or the government require the public transport to be roadworthy. The taxi must be roadworthy, the bus must be roadworthy, in order to be able to carry the life of the passengers safely. Yeah. Now, if the bus are not roadworthy and they have to travel long distance, tires are worn out, the lights are not working, brakes are not working, and all that. So we put life of the Namibian citizens at risk. Therefore, it is very much necessary to have, the bus and taxi fare, increased, according to the commodity price. Yeah. Or whenever the commodity price is increasing, fuel price is increasing, then we need to be on par. But because of the situation, we were not so. Yes. So that's why I'm saying it is very necessary to consider the subsidy, because it will relieve the bus and taxi operators, in terms of the taxi services, tires, and all that. As we speak, accident has been happening, but you will see or you will hear as a result of a tire burst, as a result of brake failure, all those kind of things, and even oil leakage. Mm-hmm. Once accident happened, and there is now a leakage somewhere, that can lead to a flame. So the fire can, the bus or taxi can caught fire, and then people can be banned beyond recognition. So that's why I'm saying it's very necessary for us for the government to consider subsidy. Okay,
indeed, Mr. Nakathingo. But just to cut you there, we will have to go on a quick ad break. And when we come back, we will discuss this further, just to go into more details regarding the taxi increment. And to our viewers, do not go anywhere. Stay glued to your screen, and we will see you right after the break. Yes, and to our viewers, we are still joined by the Secretary General of Namibia's Bus and Taxi Association, that is Mr. Pendapala Nakathingo. Mr. Nakathingo, going back to what we've discussed, if we look at the prices of fuel, are we expecting any increase in taxi fares to say, look, if you look at the current state of our country, I think we are one of the best ranked in terms of fuel price compared to all the SADC countries. But if, let's say, for instance, this war continues in the Middle East and we see fuel prices going up to $30, can we also expect the same from taxi fares?
Yeah, of course, that will now depend because, as I said, what is going to happen is, the market, is the one determine how whether the fuel, the taxi fare can increase or not. So, but in this regard, of course, we will look at all the circumstances. But if we see it is necessary, then that will be now determined according to the situation. We don't want to preempt.
Yeah.
So therefore, as we speak now, we just the bus and taxi fare have just been increasing, as starting from Monday. Yeah, of course, we are reasonable. Especially the association is not just to look at the pocket of the taxi driver, as I said earlier. We consider all the necessary factors. Remember, we have passed even the most catastrophic and difficult situation of COVID-19,
Yes.
where our members in the taxi industry have been, coping with that difficult situation. Remember, we've been operating half of the number of the passengers
Yes.
in the bus or taxi, no increment, and all those kind of situations. So that's why I'm saying the society and the Namibian at large need to understand that, of course, it's not easy to operate within the taxi industry. We need to work together, feel this pain together. That's why I say it is for our own benefit and safety. Because if we are not contributing to the bus and taxi fare as now determined, we are just robbing ourselves, safety and security whenever we are going.
Yes.
So, but what I'm trying to say is that we don't just want to look at the price per se.
Yeah.
So, but we need to look at the circumstances surrounding the taxi industry, the safety and security of all commuters. The vehicle that we are now we're being transported in, need to be safe and reliable. So now you don't want to go to the taxi rank, and the moment the taxi driver open the door for you to get in, the seats are worn out, is dirty and all that. You don't want to look at that, to see that. So, but we want to see taxis and buses where we are going to commute, so clean, safe, and well serviced. That's what we want to see. So, but of course, when the fuel price increased, I don't want to say now here we are going to increase, but we are going to look at the situation and how we're going to handle it.
Okay. And I mean, you've also again touched on another interesting point there, especially on the issue of services, tidiness, and so forth. And again, if you've looked at some of the complaints from some of the commuters, they always say things like, yeah, you find taxis that are dirty, you find some taxi drivers that are rude, why should they increase? Why should we do this if they are not improving from their end? As an association, do you guys perhaps also have some of these discussions with taxi drivers, for instance, also maybe campaigns just to enforce that tidiness amongst taxi drivers and bus drivers?
Of course, that is one of our constitutional mandate. It is within the constitution. Only that, sometimes the situation within the taxi industry is so, critical, whereby the association sometimes could not fulfill its obligation fully. Mm-hmm. So, but as I said, of course, as the time goes on, those are one of our compliance or one of the responsibilities that the association has.
Yes.
Of course, we are moving towards the developed world, and in this regard, everything is moving up. The industry have to grow. The industry have now to come to the world standard.
Yeah.
So, of course, the association is busy looking at all those aspects, whereby one of the aspects is that professionalism when it comes to the taxi drivers. That must be one of the professional, conduct. When as a taxi driver, you must feel that you are on duty. You are in your office. The bus is the office. The taxi is the office where you have to respect your office and you respect the clients that you are serving. So now looking at the professionalism is one of the aspect that the association is looking at, and it could be one of the compliance that we have to enforce. So therefore, in the near future, I can assure you, in terms of our constitution, that taxi industry will be looked as one of the industry that majorities, especially young individuals, desire to work in. So because giving service to the people, it is one of the most interesting services one might desire to do, because when you are helping others, it's like you're helping yourself. So therefore, taxi drivers have to become professional, and NAPTA will still continue to introduce those professionalism in terms of the trainings, seminars, in terms of giving, education and all that. So just recently we introduced the defensive driving and first aid training. Yeah. Why did we introduce that? It was now 2022. And number of taxi drivers and bus drivers has been trained. And we appreciate really, because it was now across the region. Yeah. Although not each and every region we conducted due to the lack of funds, but we appreciate that because the many taxi drivers and bus drivers have participated. The reason being, we want to have safer taxi industry. So whenever a taxi driver or a bus driver carry passengers on board, you carry life of the Namibians. So when you carry lives of the many Namibians, you now have to take care of those lives up until their destinations. So now, defensive driving and first aid training, for the sole purpose of, once the bus driver or taxi driver, when the tire burst, he will be able to navigate or to take control and fully charge of that particular vehicle and prevent accident. Should the accident happen not only to his vehicle, or maybe come across with the accident alongside the road, they will be able to render the first aid assistance to the victim of the accident immediately, while now the ambulances or the med rescue are arriving. So that's why you see, as we speak, accident happened, people are just there taking pictures, nobody could render assistance. People are dying while people looking on. Why? Because there is a law saying you don't touch a person involved in an accident because you are not qualified. We want to get rid of that, because saving lives is more important than having a restriction in terms of the law. But if we trained all buses and taxi drivers, they are 24 hours on the road, then they will be able to render such an assistance on behalf of those med rescues while they are arriving. And they will save as many lives as possible for the Namibian people. And saving those lives, you save your own business, because we're already in a business of transporting passengers.
Okay. And yeah, Mr. Nakathingo, just before we conclude, just one more question I want to ask. And you've touched on the issue again of professionalism, but are there perhaps any disciplinary measures that are in place for bus and taxi drivers that come across misconduct and overcharging, for instance? Because you tend to find, let's say, a first-year student who's not familiar with Windhoek, and Windhoek prices differ from one area to another. And in instances where someone is supposed to only pay $15, they end up paying 30. And people find out, what are some of the right channels where people can perhaps file their complaints for taxi drivers that perhaps
once they fall victim of the situation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, of course, we, in terms of our constitution, there are disciplinary measures. But sometimes, as I said, due to some situation we found ourselves within the taxi industry, we were not fully able to, implement these disciplinary measures. But as we speak, there are a number of, decisions that we took according to the situation and according to the incident happened. There are some times where a taxi driver or bus driver overcharge a passenger. So, of course, we have to immediately instruct the taxi driver to refund. That's one of the measures. Even if the bus operators were given an item and he happened to, that item happened to get lost in the hand of that particular driver. Of course, the driver and the owner, they have to, refund or repay that particular item if, of course, we found out that it got lost in the hands of the driver. Should the driver happen to assault the passenger, we work hand in hand with the law enforcement, and of course we dealt with that particular driver, in accordance with the law, with the law enforcement. So there are many different measures that you can apply according to how the situation happened.
Okay, indeed. And I would just like to say again, thank you, Mr. Nakathingo, for making the time to shed light on the recent increase of the taxi fares, and also just to explain to our viewers as to what really happens in and out of the bus and taxi industry. And to our viewers, that brings us to the end of our show tonight with me, your host, Philip Joseph, and the rest of the team. Good night.